Welcome to the show, everybody. Today we are featuring Electric Light Orchestra's 1981 concept album, Time, on Jet Records. Let's take a look at Side 1, Track 1, Prologue.
Unable to go beyond. I have a message from another time.
Whoa! Baron von Luxxury! Thank you for stopping by the pad. What brings you by?
Geek, it's a pleasure. I had to come because I heard the opening strains of ELO's Time, and I just had to make a beeline.
So what is it about this album that strikes a chord for you?
I think partially it's because of the age I was when I first heard it. I think I was about 9, maybe 8. It just immediately struck a chord. That's something about it. But all these years later, there's other records I heard at the time. They haven't stuck with me. This one, why is it stuck with me? I think it might be because it has the elements all in one place that I love. Pop, rock, dance, it's got synthesizers, it's got vocoders, and I love that it's kind of like a slightly awkward blend of all of these things. But the songs are so impeccable that it works.
Let's jump on down to track 3, Yours Truly, 2095. I feel like this track, track 3, has a lot in common with your song, Glass Candy. But it's purely from a musical standpoint. I tend not to listen to lyrics as much as I listen to the way a song is crafted and the elements that are used in it.
The use of the vocoder on that song, which is an instrument which takes the human voice and essentially combines it with a synthesizer, to be really simplifying it. But it essentially makes the human voice sound like a robot. And then on this song, we hear 2095. In my song, I have the chorus is also a vocoder, so maybe you're picking up on that a bit.
Probably.
But there might also be subtle elements that me, as a huge fan of this record, when you're making music and you're a fan, you never know what you're stealing from.
Let's call it influence. You've been influenced.
Thank you, it's generous, but I'm sure I'm thieving most grievously.
So it's safe to say ELO is a huge influence.
Yeah, massive influence.
What other bands influence your sound?
I'd say that ELO, especially this record, and if we're talking specifically about my most recent record, The Last Seduction, now available on Manimal Vinyl. For this record in particular, I was massively listening to this record. I was massively listening to a Steely Dan record called Gaucho. So those two records in particular, and then kind of generally dance music, like a lot of Australian bands, Empire of the Sun and Cut Copy, a lot of bands that are song-based bands with big harmonies, lots of synthesizers, but kind of more modern production.
Let's move right on down to track 4, Ticket to the Moon.
Remember the good old 1980s when things were so uncomplicated.
ELO's previous album was for the musical film Xanadu, starring Olivia Newton-John. They wrote and performed all the songs on the second half of the soundtrack, and while the film didn't do very well, the soundtrack sold like gangbusters. And my theory is that their participation in that album directly led to Jeff Lynne wanting to create a concept album of this nature. In case you guys don't know this, it tells the story of a man traveling from basically 81 or 80, and he travels to the year 2095. And he's around all these strange things and strangers, but honestly, when it comes down to it, he is the actual stranger. And I think this album pulls that off quite well. Wouldn't you agree?
It's interesting because if you really think about it, simultaneously you can listen to it from beginning to end and it tells a story. If you start piecing it apart, they don't necessarily all stand on their own. You have some kind of new wavy songs, some rock and roll songs. There's a very Phil Spector-y song. We end with a 50s Eddie Cochran, Elvis Presley kind of sounding number. So it's a strangely inconsistent musical record, but because of the storyline and just the solidness of all the songs, it works.
It's like a soundtrack to a film that never got made.
And needs to be made.
We're flipping over to side 2 to start with track 3, The Lights Go Down. So when I was researching for this album, I kept coming across this contemporary criticism that Jeff Lynne was really accused of picking up where Sgt. Pepper left off, and he could never shake that.
I think 30 years on, who gives a crap that maybe he was following up what Sgt. Pepper started, because that's a pretty great way to start making records. And he took it in a completely new direction. These are completely original songs. If you were to play to a modern ear, to a kid today, this record and anything in the Beatles catalog, they'd be like, yeah, those are two different records you're playing me. like
right.
The real, I think, though, counter argument to anyone who has the Beatles thing as a negative would be the fact that all of the living Beatles obviously approved his being the one to finish mixing and producing those two incomplete Beatles songs. They could have asked any producer on the planet, and they chose Jeff Lynne. Why? Because they hated the fact that Jeff Lynne was a Beatles fan? Clearly not. And a lot of bands in the 70s were taking off from the Sgt. Pepper thing. It's basically adding orchestration to rock music.
The first year of touring as a band, they had troubles amplifying the string instruments because all the electric guitars and the drums, they would overpower. And also you got to think a venue is not used to having to mic a violin. Eventually they came up with this remote type system so the violin players could walk all around.
That's right.
And have more of a show appeal. But that took a while to get to that point.
Yeah, they were pretty pioneering in doing that. Yeah.
So we're going to jump on down to track 4. Here is the news.
Here's the news, coming to you every hour on the hour.
This has got to be my favorite track off this album. It's got a great groove to it.
It's a great song, and it's another one where there's this little bit of wit that's right under the surface. It's not a funny song, but it's not a serious song either.
When I first learned about the concept for this album, I couldn't help but think of the storyline for Fry from Futurama, where he's a pizza delivery guy and he accidentally gets cryogenically frozen and gets released far into the future. And he is the protagonist of this album. I would love to see some sort of a mixed media, like somehow cut together a film using some of the episodes. I mean,
that's a great idea. It's got all these chapters of this future that never happened. Somebody needs to pick it up and do it.
Yeah, all right, guys, please. We're going to end with track 6, Hold On Tight.
In the 80s, there was a series of ads for coffee, not a brand, but just coffee. And they were called Coffee Achievers. And this was the song that they used in those ads.
You are the new coffee generation.
Because coffee is the calm moment that lets you think.
As two halves of a whole, this album works great, and it's a perfect little time capsule, and it's just a fun listen. And do you need to understand the story behind it, the story of this narrative of this guy traveling to the future? No, but it's one of those things that as you hear it again and again, it gives back. It's something that you discover, and I think that's really cool. So before we end, we kind of touched on your album. So where's the best place to get these items?
The album is available on iTunes and digitally. It's actually distributed through Manimal Vinyl, so you can ask for it at your local record store. It might be there. If it's not, though, you can get it at my Bandcamp.
Well, I want to thank you again, Baron von Luxury. I really learned a lot about this album.
My pleasure, Geek. Anytime you need me to come, put on ELO's Time and the opening strains of Twilight, I'll be here.
You got to teach me that trick.
Which, this one?
That guy, huh? Well, we are all out of time. I want to thank you again for watching, and until next time, I am your Vinyl Geek, and I'll catch you on the flip side.
Sunset, just over and over and over you go. Yeah. Hold on tight to your dream.
ELO's previous album was for the musical film Xanadu. Xanadu. Xana Ding Dong Do. Let's take a little bit more of this and chill out.